The clinking of my fork against the fine china was the loudest sound in the room. It was a delicate, almost musical note that hung in the air, a stark contrast to the verbal grenade that had just detonated in the middle of our carefully curated dinner. My son said loudly at dinner, "You're a loser. Mom's new husband isn't." The words didn't just hang there. They seeped into the fabric of the tablecloth, poisoned the aroma of the roasted chicken, and froze the polite smile on my wife's face. Sarah's eyes, wide with a mixture of horror and a flicker of something else, pity perhaps, darted from our 10-year-old son, Leo, to me and then back again. Leo, my boy, with my own father's stubborn chin set in defiance, stared at his plate, his courage clearly evaporating now that the deed was done. He'd been a pressure cooker of resentment since the divorce, and Mark, Sarah's new husband, the successful, golf-playing, perpetually tanned Mark, was the easiest target. But the shrapnel had landed squarely on me, and I didn't say anything. That was the most profound part of the entire awful moment. The silence. It wasn't a passive silence. It wasn't a silence of shock or defeat. It was a heavy, deliberate, and calculated silence. I felt Sarah's foot nudge mine under the table, a silent plea for me to do something, to parent, to chastise, to reclaim my authority. But I just took a slow, deliberate sip of water, the ice cubes clinking a quiet counterpoint to the pounding in my chest. You see, in that stretched, taut second, a lifetime flashed before my eyes. Not my lifetime, but his. I saw the 7-year-old who thought I could fix anything with a roll of duct tape and a story. I saw the boy who cried when his goldfish died, and I, not Mark, had been the one to hold him. I saw the countless weekends, the scraped knees, the whispered secrets, and I saw the slow, insidious erosion of that hero worship replaced by the slick, materialistic idolatry of Mark and his world of new cars and weekend getaways. To yell, to ground him, to list my own accomplishments, the late nights I worked to keep this very house, the college fund I was meticulously building, the quiet dignity of being a reliable, present father, all of it would have been small. It would have been a confirmation of his accusation, a desperate man scrambling for validation. It would have been a battle fought on a child's terms, and I refused to stoop. So I let the silence speak. I let it become a void so profound that Leo was finally forced to look up from his plate, his bravado replaced by a confused unease. He expected a reaction, anger, tears, something. He had thrown a rock, anticipating a splash, but instead, the rock had just vanished into a deep, dark well. My calm, steady gaze met his. I didn't glare. I didn't look away. I simply observed him. I saw the boy trying to be a man by tearing another one down, and a profound, heartbreaking pity welled up inside me, eclipsing the sting of his words. I placed my napkin neatly beside my plate, the white linen a flag of surrender to the old way of doing things. The game had changed. I leaned forward, just slightly. My voice, when it finally came, was low and steady, not a weapon, but a tool. "Leo," I began, and the single word carried the weight of the entire silent minute that had preceded it. "Leo," I began, and the single word carried the weight of the entire silent minute that had preceded it. "Thank you for sharing your opinion. It's important to be honest about how you feel." The confusion in his eyes deepened, swirling with a flicker of suspicion. This wasn't the script he knew. Sarah opened her mouth to interject, "Now wait just a minute," already forming on her lips, but I gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of my head. This was between me and my son now. The battlefield had been drawn, and it was the territory of the heart, not the dining room table. "I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be a winner. It's a interesting word, isn't it? People use it for all sorts of things. The team with the most points, the guy with the biggest bonus, the one who can buy the newest, shiniest things." I paused, letting the image of Mark's convertible, always impeccably clean, hang in the air between us. That's one kind of winning, I suppose. It's a very loud, very visible kind. I leaned back in my chair, breaking my gaze from him to look thoughtfully at the ceiling, as if genuinely pondering a complex philosophical question. But I've always been fascinated by a different kind of victory, a quieter kind, the kind that doesn't need to be announced. I looked back at him, my eyes softening. "For instance, your mother. She is one of the strongest people I know. She built a new life for herself, found happiness again. That took incredible courage. That's a win, a massive one." I saw Sarah's posture change, the defensive rigidity melting into something more vulnerable. I wasn't doing this for her, but she needed to hear it, to be reminded that this wasn't a war between her past and her present. "And you, Leo," I said, my focus returning solely to him. "You're navigating something incredibly difficult. Your world changed, and you're trying to find your place in it. Showing up every day, going to school, even sitting here at this table, that takes strength. That's a quiet win, too." He was staring at me now, utterly disarmed. The anger was gone, replaced with a raw, bewildered attention. He had been prepared for a fight, for shouting, for punishment. He was armed for a skirmish, and I had invited him to a seminar.
"Now, you called me a loser," I said, the word landing with a soft thud, stripped of its venom by my tone. "And based on the rules you're using right now, the rules of who has the newer car, the bigger TV, the more exotic vacation photos, you might be right. By those rules, I probably am." I let that admission settle, saw the shock register on his face. Parents weren't supposed to agree with insults. "But here's the thing, son," I said, leaning forward again, my voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing him to lean in unconsciously to hear. "I don't play by those rules. I never have. My game is different. My score is kept on a different board." I gestured vaguely around the room, but my meaning was broader. My victory isn't measured in things, but in foundations. It's measured in the man I see you becoming. It's in the respect I earn through my actions, not the applause I get from my possessions. I could see the gears turning in his head, the simplistic binary of winner, loser, starting to fracture under the weight of a more complex reality. "So when you look at Mark, I want you to see what he has. Appreciate it. There's nothing wrong with success. But when you look at me," I said, tapping my chest lightly, "I need you to try and see what I've built. It's not as flashy, you can't drive it or show it off to your friends, but it's sturdy, it's real, and it has roots so deep that no storm, not even this one, can tear it down. I finally picked up my fork again, spearing a single piece of asparagus. You are my son. You are part of that foundation. And nothing you say, no opinion you have, good or bad, will ever change the fact that I am here, I am solid, and I am not going anywhere. The silence that followed was different now. The tension had not vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer a taut wire about to snap, but a heavy, thoughtful blanket. Sarah had tears welling in her eyes, one hand pressed to her lips. Leo looked down at his hands, his shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in the first stages of a profound and uncomfortable realization.
He opened his mouth, then closed it again. A single traitorous tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek, which he quickly, angrily wiped away. He wasn't crying for me or for his mother. He was crying for the simple, painful collapse of a black and white world and the terrifying, complicated landscape of adulthood that was now rising to take its place. He had wanted to hurt me with a simple insult, and I had responded by revealing the vast, unassailable architecture of my life, an architecture he was, to his sudden shock, an integral part of. The dinner was ruined, of course. The food was cold, but something else, something far more important, had just begun. The sound of his choked sob was the only crack in the dam of his defiance. He swiped at his face again, a gesture of pure frustration, angry at his own emotions, angry at me for not being angry back. He pushed his chair away from the table, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor with a jarring shriek that made us all flinch. "I'm not hungry," he mumbled, his voice thick and unsteady. And he fled from the room without looking back. The sound of his bedroom door closing, not quite a slam, but a definitive heavy thud, echoed through the house. Sarah let out a long, shaky breath she seemed to have been holding for an hour. "David," she started, her voice a mixture of exhaustion and awe. "What was that?" I finally looked at her properly, the mask of calm I had worn for Leo's benefit softening into a weary honesty. "That," I said, "was the only thing I had left." I stood up, my own joints feeling stiff, as if I had just endured a physical trial. I began to clear the plates, the mundane action, a necessary anchor to reality. The roasted chicken, once the centerpiece of a hoped-for peaceful family meal, now looked like a prop in a failed play. Sarah stood and helped me, her movements automatic. We worked in silence for a moment, the clatter of plates and cutlery, a new, less tense soundtrack. "I thought for sure you were going to lose it," she admitted, handing me a stack of dishes. "I was ready to. What he said was unforgivable." Was it? Or was it just the truth from his 10-year-old perspective? He's not wrong, Sarah. Mark does have a boat. He does take them to Costa Rica. In the world of things, Mark is winning. Leo was just stating a fact as he sees it. "But to say it to you, like that," she protested, her loyalty to the history we shared warring with her new reality. I turned off the water and faced her. "He didn't need me to tell him he was rude. He knows that. He was waiting for me to confirm his theory, that I'm a fragile, ego-driven man who can be toppled by a child's words. I refused to play my part." I left the dishes in the sink and walked towards the living room, drawn by the quiet. I stood at the large window, looking out at the quiet street. Our street. The one we bought this house on together. The one where Leo learned to ride his bike. The foundations. I heard Sarah come up behind me. "He'll have to apologize," she said, her tone firm now, the mother taking charge. "Maybe," I said, "but an apology forced isn't an apology understood. I'd rather he sit with this discomfort.
I'd rather he wrestle with the fact that his words didn't have the power he thought they did. That's a far more valuable lesson than a rote, "I'm sorry." I could feel her looking at my profile, studying me as if I were a stranger. "You've changed, David." "Broken things have to change their shape," I replied, not taking my eyes off the darkening street. "You can't put them back together exactly as they were. You just build something new from the pieces, hopefully something stronger." Upstairs, the floorboards creaked. Leo was pacing in his room. I could picture him, a storm of confusion and shame raging inside him. The hero he'd dethroned had refused to be the villain. The battle lines he'd drawn had been erased, and he was left standing alone in a field he no longer understood. My instinct, the old primal fatherly instinct, was to go to him, to wrap him in a hug and tell him it was okay, that we all say things we don't mean. But that would have been a lie, and it would have undone everything. He had meant it. In that moment, with all the fervor his young heart could muster, he had meant to wound me. To offer him immediate, cheap absolution would be to teach him that deep wounds could be healed with shallow words. So I stayed by the window. I was the unmovable rock, not out of coldness, but out of a love so vast it could withstand his storm. I was giving him the space to realize that the foundation I spoke of wasn't just under his feet. It was all around him, a structure of love and permanence that his temporary anger could not shake. The silence from his room was now my teacher, telling me he was thinking, processing. The fight was over. The real work, the quiet, internal work of growth, had just begun. And I would be here, steadfast, when he was ready to emerge.
The silence from upstairs was a living entity now, a third presence in the house with Sarah and me. It wasn't the angry, volatile silence from the dinner table. This was a heavy, contemplative quiet, thick with unspoken thoughts. I could almost feel the vibrations of his confusion through the floorboards, the slow, painful churn of a child's mind trying to process a lesson it never expected to learn. Sarah eventually retreated to the kitchen, the sound of running water and the clink of dishes returning, a brave attempt to impose normalcy on an evening that had been anything but. I remained by the window, a sentinel. The streetlights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows across the manicured lawns. A car drove past, its headlights sweeping across the room, momentarily illuminating the ghost of our family portrait on the wall, a smiling, seamless trio that felt like it belonged to another lifetime. My mind drifted back, not to the hurtful words, but to the small, unremarkable moments that constituted the foundation I had spoken of. The Saturday mornings spent not on a golf course, but on the floor, assembling complicated Lego sets, the instructions spread out between us. The patient hours helping him sound out words in his early readers, his small finger tracing each letter. The way his hand, now so much bigger, would still, sometimes, in a moment of fatigue or distraction, seek out mine when we walked. These were the bricks and mortar. They had no resale value, they wouldn't impress his friends, but they were non-negotiable. They were my legacy. A soft creak on the staircase pulled me from my thoughts. I didn't turn, not wanting to spook him. I kept my gaze fixed on the outside world, giving him the privacy of his approach. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him stop at the bottom step, his small frame silhouetted in the dim light from the kitchen. He stood there for a long moment, a statue of indecision. Then I heard the soft shuffle of his socks on the hardwood floor. He came to stand beside me, not looking at me, but mirroring my posture, staring out at the same quiet street. His presence was a complicated knot of defiance and need. He was so close I could feel the heat from his body, yet he felt a million miles away. The silence stretched, thin and fragile. He was waiting for me to break it, to offer him the easy way out. I remained quiet, letting the weight of the unsaid words press down on him. This was his journey now. "His car is a hybrid," Leo finally said, his voice small and rough from crying. It was such a mundane, non-sequitur statement, yet it was a key turning in a lock. He wasn't talking about Mark's character, or his kindness, or his relationship with his mother. He was talking about an object. It was his way of re-engaging on neutral, factual ground.
"I know," I replied, my voice equally quiet. "Very fuel efficient." Another long pause. A dog barked somewhere down the street. "He let me sit in the driver's seat once," Leo continued, his tone still exploratory, testing the waters between us. "The seats are heated. That must feel nice in the winter," I said, keeping my responses simple, an open door he could choose to walk through or not. He shuffled his feet, digging his hands deep into the pockets of his jeans. It's not that I like his car more." The words were halting, forced out as if each one cost him a great effort. "It's just different." And there it was, the first fragile crack in his defensive armor. He wasn't apologizing, not yet. He was simply acknowledging a complexity he hadn't considered before, that things could be different without one being inherently better than the other, that my value and Mark's could exist on separate scales. "I understand," I said softly. "Different isn't bad. It's just different." I finally risked a glance down at him. He was still staring straight ahead, but his jaw was no longer clenched. A single stray tear had traced a clean path through the lingering grime on his cheek. He was looking at the world outside, but I knew he was really looking inward, at the confusing new map of his emotions I had forced him to confront. The dinner had ended, but the conversation, in its deepest, most important sense, was only just beginning. He had taken the first tremulous step back from the ledge, and I was here, steady and waiting, to welcome him home. He took a deep, shuddering breath that seemed to come from the soles of his feet. The sound of it, so raw and unguarded, was more profound than any apology. He was letting the storm inside him settle. "It's loud," he whispered, almost to himself. "The TV is always on, and his phone is always buzzing. It's a lot." I nodded slowly, my eyes still on the tranquil street, giving him the safety of my profile. Quiet can be good. It gives you room to think. He fell silent again, but this time it was a companionable silence, the sharp edges worn smooth. We stood there for what felt like several minutes, father and son, watching the night deepen. A neighbor across the street came out to walk his dog, the animal straining at the leash with joyful energy. It was a slice of normal life, a reminder that the world continued to turn outside our own personal earthquake. "I'm sorry," he finally said, the words so quiet they were almost swallowed by the hum of the refrigerator. They weren't directed at me, not yet. They were spoken to the window pane, a confession to the night.
I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't. Not entirely. The wound was still fresh. Instead, I said, "I know you are." This seemed to give him the courage he needed. He turned his head, his eyes, red-rimmed and swimming with a new kind of vulnerability, finally met mine. "I didn't mean it. Not all of it." He struggled, his brows furrowing as he grappled with the complex tangle of his feelings. I get so mad sometimes, and it's easier to be mad at you." The honesty in that admission was a physical blow, but a necessary one. It was the truth I had known all along, the truth that had allowed me to hold my silence. His anger at me was safe. His anger at the situation, at the dismantling of his family, at his mother's new life, that was a terrifying, formless monster. I was a tangible target. "I know that too," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I carefully kept in check. "And it's okay to be mad. You can be as mad as you need to be, but Leo—" I paused, turning fully to face him now, forcing him to hold my gaze. "You can't use your words as weapons. Not with me. Not with anyone. You're better than that. The man you're becoming is better than that." He looked down, studying the pattern on the rug, as if it held the secrets to the universe. "It's just, he's always talking about his job and his money, and you never do." He looked up, genuine confusion in his eyes. "Why don't you ever talk about that stuff?" And there it was, the heart of the matter. In his world, value was declared, advertised, proven with receipts. My quiet constancy, my refusal to compete on that battlefield, was interpreted as having nothing to show. "Because, son," I said, a small, sad smile touching my lips, "the things I'm most proud of in my life, they aren't for sale, and they don't need to be announced." I gestured around us, at the house, the quiet street. "This life we built, your mother and I, it wasn't about a prize at the end. It was about the building itself, the work, the love. That's my success. It lives in you. It lives in the memories we made in these rooms. You can't put a price on that. And you don't need to brag about it because it just is. It's solid." He was listening now, truly listening, his young mind trying to wrap itself around a concept as vast and quiet as the ocean. He had been comparing two men based on the noise they made, and he was only just beginning to understand that the deepest waters are often the most still. He took a tentative step closer, the physical distance between us shrinking. "Dad?" he whispered, his voice small again. "Yeah, Leo? Can we finish the Lego Millennium Falcon tomorrow? The one in the basement?" My heart swelled, a painful, beautiful pressure in my chest. He wasn't asking for a new, expensive toy. He was asking to return to our fortress, to the quiet, patient work of building something together, piece by piece. It was his way of reaching for the foundation, of testing its strength with his own hands. "Of course we can," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We can start right after breakfast." He nodded, a single decisive dip of his chin. Then, in a movement that was both awkward and heartbreakingly sincere, he leaned forward and wrapped his arms around my waist, burying his face in my shirt. It wasn't the easy forgiveness of a child who had already forgotten. It was the hard-won embrace of a boy who had seen a glimpse of a more complicated world and was choosing to hold on to the one solid thing he knew was real. I held him tightly, feeling the tremors of his emotional exhaustion finally subside. The war was over. The reconstruction had begun. The next morning, the sun didn't just rise. It poured in through the kitchen window, washing the room in a light that felt new, that felt earned. The memory of the previous night's dinner wasn't gone. It was a fossil now, preserved in the layers of our family, a permanent record of a fracture and the slow, deliberate process of healing that had begun. Leo was quiet through breakfast, but it was a different kind of quiet. The storm had passed, and this was the calm, saturated aftermath. He ate his cereal with a focused intensity, his eyes occasionally flicking to mine, not with guilt or defiance, but with a new, unspoken understanding. We had navigated the first true, treacherous straits of his adolescence not by shouting over the gale, but by steadying the rudder. After he pushed his bowl away, he looked at me. "The falcon?" "Lead the way," I said. We descended into the basement, a space that was more a temple to our shared history than a storage area. The air was cool and smelled of concrete and old wood. And there, spread across a vast plywood board on the old workbench, was our project, the Lego Millennium Falcon, a sprawling, complex galaxy of gray and blue bricks, half-finished, a monument to patience. We didn't talk much at first. We found our familiar positions, the instructions opened between us. He sorted through pieces, his brow furrowed in concentration, and I began the methodical work of building the inner superstructure. The silence was no longer a void to be feared. It was a language we were both fluent in. It was filled with the soft, satisfying clicks of plastic bricks locking into place, a sound more profound than any words of forgiveness could ever be. He was the one who broke it, his hand stilled, a small, intricate piece held between his fingers. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy?" I think I get it now," he said, his voice small but clear in the quiet basement. "The foundation." My hands stopped their work. I looked at him, waiting. He gestured vaguely at the skeletal frame of the starship. It's not like one of his video games. You can't just reset it if you mess up. You have to follow the instructions. You have to put the pieces you can't see in first, the ones deep inside, or the whole thing." He trailed off, searching for the word. A wave of emotion, so powerful it was almost dizzying, washed over me. In that moment, I saw the man he would become, a man of depth, of understanding, a man who could see beyond the glossy, finished surface to the intricate, vital architecture beneath. He had translated the abstract lesson of the night before into the tangible reality of plastic bricks, and in doing so, he had understood everything. "That's exactly right, Leo," I said, my voice thick. "Always build the foundation first. Make it strong, make it true. The rest is just decoration." We worked for another hour, the ship growing under our hands. It wasn't about finishing it anymore. It was about the act of building itself. It was about the shared purpose, the silent collaboration, the unshakable knowledge that every piece we clicked into place was another brick laid in the far more important structure between us, a structure that had just been stress-tested and had held firm. Later, as we climbed the stairs back into the light of the main house, he paused on the top step, turning back to look at me. The sunlight caught the dust motes dancing in the air around him, and he seemed for a breathtaking second both the little boy I had taught to walk and the young man I was now teaching to stand his ground. "You know," he said, a hint of his old mischievous smile playing on his lips, "it's going to be the coolest thing in the whole world when it's done." I looked at my son, really looked at him, at the resilience in his eyes, the dawning wisdom in his expression, the unbreakable bond that silence and patience had forged, where anger would have only burned a bridge. I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling the solid, real weight of him, and I said, "Leo," with a certainty that came from the very deepest part of my soul, "it already is." And in that moment, standing in a pool of sunlight on a simple basement step, I knew with every fiber of my being that I had not just won a difficult night, I had not just taught my son a lesson. I had passed on a legacy not of wealth or status, but of quiet strength. A legacy not built on being louder, but on being deeper. A legacy that proved once and for all that the truest victories are not announced with a shout, but are whispered in the silent, unshakable space between a father and his son, and heard for a lifetime.